Hey everybody, 3 Point Landing returns after a long time in hiatus. We're here to talk about Star Trek Picard, and oh my god.
You could just go with Star Trek Picard.
Oh god, wow.
One day I'll do the intro, but not today.
Today is not that day.
Not today. I'm not going to do it today.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm enjoying watching you.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't, it's really only our producer who suffers. For me, it's practice.
Okay, go for it.
Hey everybody, welcome to 3 Point Landing. Tonight, we're going to talk about Star Trek Picard. I know it's been a long time since you've heard from us, but we're here to talk about all the video games, movies. Oh my god, I've bungled that all over the place. Woo. Nerves. All right. Welcome to 3 Point Landing. I'm your host, Matthew. With me,
Misha. I am Misha. I still am. That's me.
He is Misha, and we're here to talk about Star Trek and Star Trek Picard.
Yeah, it's been a while since our last episode. Last time around, we talked about Star Wars, so now I guess it's only fair that we get to the other big sci-fi franchise out there, Star Trek, which is currently having a kind of a renaissance period, if you will. The past couple of years, I've seen the introduction of a new show, Star Trek Discovery, and now we have an even newer show, Star Trek Picard, which brings back one of the most beloved characters in the franchise, as played by Patrick Stewart.
Yeah. Oh, and don't forget Short Treks. Let's not forget that one. A great series of short stories set in the Star Trek universe. But
Right.
anyway, Star Trek Picard. I think this is a series that genuinely surprised us in the sense that many of us didn't think it would ever happen. You know, I mean, after Star Trek Nemesis, a film that was considered disappointing critically, commercially, and even among fans, it would be reasonable to assume that Patrick Stewart had pretty much hung his hat on that character. You know what I mean?
Definitely. And from what I've heard, he was very adamant that he had no interest in returning to the role that made him famous to a mainstream audience. He didn't want to come back as Captain Picard because he said that he'd done pretty much everything he could have done with the role. And if he was going to be coming back, it had to be something completely different. It would have to be something that would make it worth his time in the same way that he came back to play Professor X one last time in Logan.
Exactly. So what I heard, excuse me for that snort.
I heard no snort.
All right. So yeah, he had been invited before actually, and he had turned down those offers.
Right.
And to what you said, like the performance he turned in and the script, he got to be involved in Logan, reportedly energized and galvanized, sort of like will to play the character again.
Right.
And if anything, I think what Logan did for him was sort of like lay down the terms of what a swan song for a beloved character that he co-created, would look like.
Absolutely. But seeing as Logan was designed as the final adventure of Wolverine and Professor X, I'm hoping that this doesn't turn out to be Captain Picard's last ride, because given what we've seen from the first half of the season, he's still got a lot of life left in him.
Yeah. I mean, I'm of two minds of it, and I don't mean to say that I'm conflicted. What I mean to say is that I think, yes, I would love to see more adventures with Captain Picard, and clearly Patrick Stewart, despite being close to 80 years old, is very lucid and very capable of, really expressing the full range of an act of emotions and range that an actor at the peak of his career could have.
Right.
There's also this worry that maybe he won't stick around, long enough to really see that character through. So it's like I had hoped for him to do it as a way to close the book on the character, the way that Professor X had the book closed on him. But at the same time, hearing reports that they've renewed for a second season and that he's still excited to do more Picard is also super interesting.
I think it's encouraging, actually, that he's still got a passion for it, that he's still excited for it. And I can't wait to see what they come up with. But just maybe a little background. I mean, what do you remember of the character? He hasn't been on screen for 20 years at this point. What do you, as a casual fan, go into this expecting? What do you think?
Okay, so for me, Picard has always been the gentleman captain, the diplomat captain, that's sort of like captain who's born from an era of like, the United Nations being, setting the terms of geopolitics. So he's very much like this captain who comes from a very supposedly enlightened political context. And that to me is the character I expected to see in every iteration that ever comes out, whether it's in video games or in movies.
Right.
And so this series surprised me because it's taking place 35 years or 30 years, I don't remember really, after the last time we had seen the character, really sets a completely different political context where he's no longer the great captain. I think it's a very interesting take on the character. Like, he's had his golden age. People still probably at one point spoke of Picard in reverential terms. And now he's just sort of like, he's just a relic from a bygone era. And I think what really worsens that for the character, as we see in the show, is that he had a sort of fall from grace because of things that happened before the series started.
Okay, well, for my part, I mean, as a longtime fan of the franchise, I own way too many books and DVDs and Blu-rays on the subject, but for me, going into this, I agree with you for the most part. Captain Picard was always more cerebral. He was always more of, again, I agree with you. He was the consummate gentleman captain. He was essentially the epitome of what the franchise represented. Whereas Captain Kirk, who came before him, William Shatner, was more of a cowboy.
A swashbuckler, absolutely. And Captain Sisko on Deep Space Nine was more of, he was like the sheriff who stands alone in a one-horse town. The renegade cop.
And Captain Janeway would change from week to week depending on what was happening. I'm sorry, that woman was, she was a great captain when she had to be.
Yeah.
But there were other days where she just didn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to turn this into an impassioned defense of Voyager, but like,
I love Voyager. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, as much as I love Voyager, that is absolutely freaking true. Her character was incredibly mercurial or mutable depending on the whims and interests of the writers.
That is true, or maybe even what Kate Mulgrew felt like from week to week. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Let's not forget she loathed 7 of 9 at the beginning.
Yeah,
but we'll get to that later on. Okay, but as far as Captain Picard goes, it was with great shock and amazement that we heard this news a year ago or so that he would be coming back to play the part, that Patrick Stewart was coming back to play the part. And it made one a little bit nervous. Like, can you really recapture lightning in a bottle? Can you really bring us back to 20 years ago, the last time he played this role, and still have that kind of authority, that kind of credibility? But judging by the first half of the season, not even the first half of the season, even the first episode, he just nails it. Absolutely. Of all the things that you could nitpick or complain about on this show, he is not one of them.
Yeah, well, I think Patrick Stewart and there's certain kinds of actors who come to embody the roles that they played for so long that they could perform these roles in their sleep.
Oh, but he doesn't act that way. He never phones it in.
Oh yeah. No, but I mean, when I'm saying act in their sleep, that's not an insult. That's saying that this person lives, breathes, and has internalized the character to such a degree that I feel like I've never had the privilege to work with Patrick Stewart, but one would imagine that you turn to him and you snap your fingers and say Picard on, and he'd be like instantly up, like playing the character like nothing happened.
Fair enough. 3-point landing. So the show is set 20 years after the last film, pretty much taking place in real time, as it were. Yeah. Captain Picard, who has since been promoted to Admiral and retired, is living happily on his family vineyard, a place where he swore he would never ever end up. That's why he went into Starfleet, because he didn't want to go into the family business. He didn't want to do what was expected of him.
Yeah.
But I don't know if people remember, but back in Star Trek Generations, Picard's first feature film, his elder brother and his nephew, who would have continued on the family tradition, they died in a fire. And so it seems that Picard has picked up the family business, which was hastened in no small part by his participation in some sort of scandalous event.
Yeah. Well, you were saying something about how he swore he would never return to do that family business. I gotta tell you, you say some shit when you're 44 years old. You're like, I'll never do this thing. 33 years later, whole new perspective. Am I right?
Yes, he was a tumultuous 44-year-old when he made that proclamation.
Rebellious at 44, buck in the family. But anyway, so this great tragedy that is alluded to from the very beginning of the episode is his participation in a rescue effort to save the people of Romulus. Romulus, yes, to save the Romulan people from a great supernova event.
Yeah, their sun was going to explode.
Yeah,
and that's the event that sent Spock to the past in the Star Trek reboot.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Like, not necessarily relevant to the season, but attentive fans such as such as us will know that the cataclysmic event that is causing the Romulan sun to explode is the same event that precipitated the events of Star Trek, the reboot movie, 2006, 2009?
9, I think.
Yeah, 2009.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this explosion is the one that Spock Prime tried to save.
This is what sent Leonard Nimoy and Eric Bana to the past. And that's where they met Chris Pine and all his friends.
Yeah. So that's a little bit of Easter egg there. But what's important what's happening on Picard's side of the fence is trying to evacuate the Romulans. And I think the rescue effort goes wrong. It goes disastrously wrong when a bunch of synth rebels sabotage
a bunch of androids.
Right. Yeah, a bunch of android rebels sabotage the rescue effort, and it directly leads to the banning of all synthetic life.
Right.
And that might seem really inconsequential, but you realize that if you know the character of Picard, that is something personal to him because his best friend happened to be a synthetic life form.
Right, which unfortunately brings us back to Star Trek Nemesis, which was a truly, truly terrible film, if we're going to be honest, where Tom Hardy played a young Patrick Stewart, and they basically fought over, I don't even remember what. And the android Commander Data had to sacrifice himself to save the Enterprise and save everybody.
And he was the Prince of Remus or something like that, right? Or something.
He was a clone of Picard from a failed operation.
But he was leading
eventually replace him, and eventually he took over the Romulan Senate, and he lured the Enterprise out to Romulus on the pretense of peace talks with the full intention of just murdering Picard or draining him of his blood or something.
Something, whatever. I think he lived on the dark side of Remus, so even then darkness was his ally.
I don't... I try and block out that movie. Let's get back to Picard.
All right.
So the show has the retired admiral living on his chateau happily, minding his own business, just wallowing in his self-pity for having failed to save the Romulans, when a news crew comes along on the anniversary of his failure, and they ask him what he's been doing here all this time, and they ask him why he retired. And I think that scene, that single scene, is what encapsulates the entire show in a nutshell. It's this member of the old guard, in this case Picard, being forced to contend with a brave new world, one that he doesn't necessarily recognize, one that he doesn't necessarily subscribe to, but he is nevertheless steadfast in his principles and his beliefs to the point that he's recused himself from what's going on.
Yeah. And I think, so moving forward, everybody, spoilers, but everything...
knock yourself out. We were 5 episodes in, come on.
What do you think of the show so far? How do you feel about everything that's happened past that point?
Past that point, episodes 1 through 3 or even 1 through 4 were a slow burn. That's to be sure. Which I don't mind, actually. I don't mind a slow burn as long as it's going somewhere. I mean, look at the first 3 seasons of Game of Thrones, right? Before it got serious. No, I'm not kidding. Before the last couple of seasons, Game of Thrones was a brilliant show. And I have no issues with table setting, as it were, with world building. That's great because they have to show us what's happened in the world of Star Trek since 20 years ago. They have to show us what's happened to characters that we once knew, that we once followed from week to week. Because let's face it, Discovery is a prequel. So it has next to no bearing on what's happening here. For the most part, no, not for the most part. For all intents and purposes, this is the first new Star Trek, chronologically speaking, since 2002. Since Nemesis bombed at the box office.
I think what you're trying to say basically is that this is the first ever piece of new Star Trek that actually takes place at a point in time beyond, like, the furthest in the continuity we've ever seen.
Yeah, I guess you can put it that way.
Unlike, not counting, of course, like, apocryphal stuff like the video games and, comics and all that.
No, basically, if it's not on the screen, it never happened.
Yeah.
So I think it's fascinating. From a fan point of view, it was fascinating to see what the Federation's been up to. It's also terrifying to see what the Federation's been up to, in that they were once what you said. They were the United Nations of space, right?
Yeah.
But here they seem to be reverting to they seem to be de-evolving.
Regressing, I believe, is the word you're looking for.
Thank you. They're regressing to some sort of an isolationist, xenophobic organization that's more concerned with preserving the status quo than actually doing the stuff that they were formed to do, namely, seek out new life and explore and expand their knowledge. Now they're more concerned with things like politics and reputation or border security.
Well, you might be able to enlighten me about this better than anyone else, but I always felt like there's a difference between the Federation and the Starfleet. Right. So what happens is that I feel like Federation has always been a political entity.
That's always, the UN.
Yeah.
Right.
The Federation has always been about, sort of like policing the relationship between different cultures so that they can exist in peaceful coexistence.
Right.
While Starfleet was the exploratory arm. And I feel like what happened here in the show is that once Starfleet its mandate used to be to go out and explore and seek out new life, reach out to other people, help them and all that stuff. Now it's that regression that you describe is made most manifest in the fact that Starfleet's mission has turned inwards, has become it has always served the interests of the Federation, but now it's more subservient to the Federation.
Okay, that makes sense. And what's kind of, I don't know if it's off-putting or if it's just the way of the world, okay? But I believe that Patrick Stewart said that a lot of this was done intentionally to try and reflect the state of the world now as we live in, which has actually turned off a lot of the old school fans who've been following the show, because they subscribe to the fact that the Federation Starfleet has always been, their existence has always been representative of some kind of a utopia.
I think what I see, what this manifests to me is like people have become accustomed to the idea that Starfleet and Federation could be trusted in any version of Star Trek to be inherently noble.
Right.
And so now that they're seeing a version of Starfleet and the Federation that's less than that, it's very disheartening for them as fans.
Absolutely. And that's why Black Ops organizations like Section 31 from Deep Space Nine and on Discovery, that's why organizations like that are looked on with suspicion, because they go against the grain of what this organization is supposed to stand for.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how Picard, with his old world, with his old school values, comes up against the powers that be, who are just trying to maintain the new status quo. And if you look at his dialogue in the first episode where he says why he left Starfleet, he said it was because that it was no longer Starfleet. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's very telling of who he is as a character, and also where the show is going to be taking us. It's really a one last mission kind of narrative where, the old guard comes out for one last round.
So how do you feel? Okay, so there's this one important piece of plot that is crucial to Picard's journey, which is the existence of a young woman named Soji
Right.
and Daj.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you feel about that character? So she's presented basically as this person who has an emotional connection
Right.
with Patrick Stewart, with Picard, and sort of seeks refuge with him. And she's taken off the.
Yeah, go ahead. We're doing spoilers.
She gets killed. So Daj
gets killed.
And so distraught is Picard that he needs answers for why Daj was killed.
Mm-hmm.
And he discovers that Daj has a twin sister, and now his entire mission is built around that, on this journey to find Soji and ostensibly rescue her.
Right. And
so how do you feel about that, and how does that dovetail with like all this setting and world building that you talked about?
Something I rather liked Daj, the way she was presented to us. She was like fully formed. She was a sympathetic character. She was easy to like, and she was gone too soon. I mean, as ridiculous as that sounds, she was essentially the sacrificial lamb on which the entire narrative hinges.
Yeah,
because it's her loss, her death, that spurs Picard into action in the first place.
Yeah.
To hunt down, to search for her twin sister so that he can, save her or protect her from nefarious elements. In this case, Romulans, who have vested interests in making sure that Soji never sees the light of day. And part of the reason for that is it is revealed early on that Daj and her twin Soji are actually androids. They are actually the android offspring of the dearly departed Commander Data, and they were built by one Bruce Maddox, the Federation's foremost expert in cybernetic research, who, for longtime fans, will recognize as being the guy who tried and failed to get permission to dissect data and essentially make a workforce that would essentially be synthetic slaves. Okay. Picard stood up against him because he said Data didn't want to do that, and Data, it all came to a head in a trial in the only good season 2 episode, Measure of a Man, where they argued that Data had the same rights and privileges as any biological member of the Federation, as any biological citizen. And the cool thing about that was that Data didn't take it personally, being an android, to the point that he actually kept up correspondence with Bruce Maddox in the years that followed. So to hear that Maddox would have tried to build his own androids based on Data schematics and whatnot in this series, that was quite interesting for me, actually. Especially when we see that part of the tragedy that put Captain Picard into retirement was an android workforce that went berserk. So for me, it's interesting in how this series draws a lot from pre-existing lore. And I liked the premise that they were building on the lore. What I wasn't so crazy about was episodes 2, 3, and 4 were kind of slow going, honestly. They were really slow.
Yeah. Okay. Like for me, episodes 2, 3, and 4, I didn't mind them so much, but I have conceded before that that I'm a little bit, I wouldn't say shallower, but I'm very easy to please in terms of like, what is delivered to me on television. And as long as I'm enjoying things in the moment,
right,
I'm not really worried about scrutinizing them in the big picture until I'm done with all of the episodes.
Right.
So, right. But right now there are lots of big question marks hovering over my head about this series, like, in terms of pacing, in terms of how they distribute information, in terms of how they withhold information so that the viewers can be like, ooh, ah, in mystery.
Yeah.
But how do you feel about like the way the story is unfolding?
Okay. Let me be honest. Again, what I mentioned earlier was I was beyond excited to see this show. I mean, I couldn't wait until the premiere, honestly.
And I'm still excited every week. Are you excited?
So am I. I'm still excited every week.
Yeah.
But what I am kind of not entirely enjoying is the somewhat unnatural grafting of prestige TV hallmarks onto this classic property. No. Let me explain, okay? It's not a case of I don't like the CGI. I prefer models. I prefer plastic models against a blue screen. It's not like that. I mean, I don't mind that everything has a shiny new coat of paint. I don't mind that everything looks completely different, because if you remember, like, the old Star Trek movies look completely different from the show.
Yeah.
That's fine. Things change. Things change.
And also these things need to be visually consistent with Discovery. Even though Discovery takes place hundreds of years before, like, under the new renaissance of Star Trek, you need to create a unifying, like, visual brand that is distinct from what was created 18 years ago.
That's true. That's why even if something like Doctor Who, that's been around for like 55 odd years, even that show, for all the new bells and whistles, they have no qualms about tweaking their own
designs,
their own mythology or their own past to suit what's happening here and now, and that's fine with me. But what I'm talking about more is things like the things that seem incongruous to Star Trek. Now, I'm not saying there's no room for cursing, for example, but the way it's handled here is just so callous. It's so forced that you feel that they only included it to justify the rating of the show. Like, there's at one point an admiral chews out Picard, and she accuses him of having sheer fucking hubris. I mean, that literally comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, especially when sheer hubris is a pretty powerful accusation on its oath.
Yes.
That doesn't require the use of an F-bomb.
Right. Now, as much as the Discovery guys justified their F-bomb back in the first season with an inexperienced ensign, here we're talking about the CNC, the Commander-in-Chief of Starfleet.
I think I will nitpick in support of that argument, which is that when people of Picard's time and later start dropping F-bombs and saying all manner of expletives, it feels jarring because you're not accustomed to hearing that around that milieu.
Right.
But at least Star Trek Discovery takes place at a rawer time, a more raw time for the Federation. So you kind of expect this degree of informality from an untested crew.
Maybe so.
Yeah. So I feel like yes, reduce the profanity in Picard, while in Discovery, leave it as it is.
Maybe fine, fair enough, because they're still finding their way and all that sort of thing. They're not yet the enlightened humans of the 24th century.
Yeah.
But in this case, with Star Trek Picard, it really just sticks out more. It honestly does. It sticks out more when people are cursing. It sticks out more when all of a sudden we have graphic violence, which in concept, I have no issue with graphic violence. But sometimes you can tell that they just put in a fight scene every now and then just to shake things up, as opposed to actually serving the plot. Like, there is a sequence where the chateau is invaded by Romulan spies, and all of a sudden everyone turns into James Bond. Like, Picard knows where the hidden guns are, that his Romulan housekeepers have stashed conveniently.
I thought they were more like 3 Chow Yun Fats in the same room.
But I think what I take the most issue with is the mystery box format. Honestly, the mystery box format, if you're not familiar, is something that J.J. Abrams came up with on Lost and Felicity and even Felicity and Alias. That's something where he and his guys come up with a mystery that has to be answered, but before the end of the show, you don't necessarily know what it is. You don't necessarily how we're going to get there, but as the episodes go by, they just keep on revealing smaller and smaller boxes inside the bigger ones.
Yeah, like
so every mystery you solve reveals a new one, right? Yeah. And in this case, in Picard, that mystery doesn't entirely feel organic or engaging. And I'm sorry, but it's just not interesting to see him trying to get to Soji on the Borg cube when we've known everything we need to know about her since the first episode.
Yeah. I'll have to agree with you on this one, in the sense that, okay, so Abrams didn't originate the mystery box, but it's definitely like it
but he popularized it.
But even before Abrams' descent into ignominy following Rise of the Skywalker, the director producer has always been criticized for this kind of storytelling approach because he tends to put the mystery cart before the horse, so to speak.
Right.
In the sense that he's using it as a MacGuffin to attract viewer interest without actually having a plan in mind for how he intends to answer that curiosity.
Right.
And the other thing that you spoke to, which I'd like to affirm, is that sort of insincerity, falseness, and deceit that seems to come with the approach from its worst practitioners, including Abrams and Outlet, which is we see Soji, and they gave us so much information of Soji, so now we're no longer as invested in following her plot. But at the same time, they also tend to, without spoiling things, they tend to withhold certain bits of information from us for the sole purpose of making it so that they can set up a reveal later. Without spoiling things, and I'm being very specific about not spoiling this, there is a situation where a character's arrival in a scene seems kind of puzzling and mysterious.
Right.
And little alarm bells were sounding off on my head. And I just thought that was either lazy writing or writing born out of a necessity to be efficient, to just skip over beats so that they can get to where they need to be.
Right.
But it turns out later that character does reveal a deceitful or at least dishonest streak. And I'm like, and when that happened, I was like, oh, you were only able to pull this off by lying to my face.
Exactly right. Another example precisely of that, of characters withholding information just because it serves the plot, but it doesn't actually make any sense. I know you haven't seen the 6th episode yet, but there's a sequence there where
you can drop the spoilers on me. I think it's minor. A single episode is minor enough out of a series of 5.
Okay, in the 6th episode, Reformed Borg Hugh Picard says, we got to find Soji, right?
Yeah.
And then Hugh, the former Borg, tells him, why? What's so special about her? And Picard's all like, no time to explain. Where is she? I'm like, dude, how long would it have taken to explain? How long? That was the most blatant for me. I'm like, Jesus Christ.
This reminds me of a moment in a very wildly derided moment in video games where a character once said, I don't have the time to explain why I don't have time to explain. But anyway,
that's exactly what it sounded like. But make no mistake, it is fun seeing old characters again. I love seeing Patrick Stewart as Captain Picard. He hasn't missed a step. I don't agree with everything they're doing with the old guy, but it's just fun to see him, and he's clearly enjoying himself.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? That's probably the best part of this series, and I'd like to end on that note, is that everybody in it is excellent, mostly Picard, mostly Patrick Stewart.
Yes.
And that alone is kind of like the reward of watching the show, even if it does resort to a little bit of like narrative trickery to get where it wants to go.
But, beyond the first season of the original series, literally every Star Trek show that followed had a terrible first season.
That is true.
That's not even exaggeration.
And, they were going to get second season, supposedly, so,
So maybe they'll get their act in order.
Yeah.
But as far as familiar faces go, I'm really digging seeing, what 7 of 9 has been up to.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying hearing little snippets of familiar characters. I mean, all the name dropping that they do every now and then. But some things just really leave you scratching your head. It's like they maybe, I don't know, did they rush this, or did they just not have a plan before they started shooting? Because some things just feel contrived or stretched out to the point of inanity, honestly.
I mean, you said so yourself on the way here to the studio. You said that the showrunner is Michael Chabon, and I believe this is his first TV show he's running.
Yeah, but the guy's a Pulitzer Prize winning writer. You'd think he would know something about narrative structure, characterization, plot, pacing.
Yeah, but when you're collaborating, you can have control over all of those things and all the luxury to edit and go over those things when you're working alone. But when you're working with a team of 20, 30, 100 people, it could be different. I mean, I don't want to make excuses for the guy necessarily, but we're still watching the show. We're still we're still jazzed.
But how much of that continued watching comes from the fact that you already loved this character before the show even started versus anything the show has done on its own?
That, and I also really love Star Trek.
That's fair. Okay, fine. 3-point landing. Okay, but what do you think? I mean, what do you enjoy about the show?
I enjoy, like even if the narrative is like faulty, I enjoy the new themes.
Yeah.
I enjoy the new ideas. I enjoy things like that warrior monk race of assassins that joins
warrior nun.
Warrior nuns. Those guys are pretty cool. I love some of the Romulan intrigue. It's not entirely new, but it's still fun to have it, especially since we don't see Romulans in literally every incarnation of Star Trek.
May I just say I love Picard's snarky Romulan housekeepers.
Oh yeah, those guys are cool. Those guys
are
cool.
Amazing, especially Irish Romulan mom.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're boss.
Yeah, they are. They're kind of awesome, and I like that they put a different face on these traditional Star Trek bad guys. They show that they come in all shapes and sizes. They're not all just devious schemers with bowl cuts and shoulder pads.
Yeah. And that is it for Star Trek Picard.
Yeah, there's 4 episodes to go for a 10-episode first season. Yeah, I'm interested to see where it goes, and I really, really hope they stick the landing.
Yeah, but hey, great Star Trek, great time to be a Star Trek fan, at least.
Yeah, there's at least 2 animated series in production. Supposedly there's like a new show and a new movie in production. We don't know who's going to be making it, what it's going to be about, who's going to be in it, but the recent Paramount CBS merger with has reunified all the disparate parts of the franchise. So
that's right, the television empire and the movie empire.
So hopefully we'll be seeing more cohesion in the franchise, something akin to what we had back in the 90s, where things that happened in the shows had repercussions on the films and vice versa.
You mean like a cinematic universe?
Ooh, that sounds like an episode. We'll totally get into that at some point. All right, cool. I don't know. How do we end this?
I thought I had it when
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's all useful information. But
I keep talking.
Misha just loves Star Trek. Anyway, that is it for Star Trek Picard. This is 3 Point Landing. You can listen to us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and follow us on Facebook. Peace out.
What the hell was that? Don't try and make that a thing. That's not your thing. It will not be your thing.
It's called panic.
I don't know what the heck that was.
I was panic.
3 Point Landing is recorded at Big Baby Studios. Follow us on Facebook at 3 Point Landing PH.